today's webinar from Digits. It's Train for Work, Perspectives on the Future of L&D in the UK. Today we'll be sharing exclusive insights from a new report by Digits, in which we surveyed more than 1,000 UK employees and L&D practitioners on their views of learning opportunities today. I'm Cathryn Newbery and I'm Head of Content at Digits. Joined with me today are Andrea and Bradley. Welcome both, it's great to have you with us. Andrea, could you tell us a little bit about your experience in the industry and what you do here at Digits?
Thanks, Cathryn. Yeah, hi. So I'm the LMS sales manager here at Digits, and I've been working with the organisation for just roughly over 2 years now. So my background is very much ed tech and educational publishing. So I've been very much in the world of learning management systems and education, and now working on more of the corporate side. So yeah, really pleased to meet you all today, and thanks for joining us.
Lovely. And Bradley, would you mind telling us what you're up to as our head of talent?
Yeah, sure. So Bradley Burgoyne, Head of Talent here at Digits. I've been with the organisation a grand total of 3.5 months and actually joined from a customer. So it wasn't so long ago I was on the other side of these kind of webinars. Really interested to share the insights that we've got today around L&D. And my responsibility here is regarding all of the L&D strategy as well as internal recruitment.
Okay, lovely, thanks so much. Great to have you both with us today. Hopefully you've come across Digits before, but in case you haven't, here's a quick reminder and introduction. Digits is a digital learning provider with more than 3 decades of experience in the industry. Our award-winning LMS, Digits LMS, is used by household names such as B&Q and Kia, and we also create bespoke learning content for a range of clients. Digits joined the Cypher Group in 2020, which has been a great experience, so you may have come across us as part of Cypher Group. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to dive into the labour market challenges that L&D teams are contending with at the moment, how they're responding to those challenges, and what employees think about current L&D opportunities. We're also going to offer some suggestions for next steps you might want to consider based off the findings of our report. Before we start, just a few notes on the report that we're talking about today. The findings are based on 2 separate surveys we carried out in November 2021. First, we surveyed 60 UK-based in-house HR and L&D practitioners, and we also surveyed a representative sample of 1,001 British adults. The full report is available to download from the handouts area of the control panel on the webinar screen at the moment, and you can also access it via the URL shown on the screen below. That's digits.co.uk/r-we-train-for-work. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Bradley now and disappear. I'll rejoin you all for the Q&A at the end.
Thank you, Cathryn. So let's get in. Let's get in and have a look at the results of and the findings of our report. So to start with, we'll look at the UK labour market, and I guess as we all know at the moment, it's extremely tight at the moment. The UK labour market. You know, if you've tried to fill a vacancy recently, or lost a great employee to a rival organisation, I'm sure you'll know just how competitive it is out there in the marketplace. And according to Cypher Labour Market Outlook, published towards the end of 2021, it's really hard to fill some of those vacancies at the moment. That's really prevalent. Our own research conducted in that report in November 21 underlines this, and you can see some of the key statistics from that research up on the slide here. Nearly 1/3 of workers said that they are planning to look for a new job in the next 12 months, and a further 1/3 said that they hadn't decided if they would stick with their current employer or try to find a new role. Employers' main responses to these hiring difficulties, according to the CIPD's report, are rising wages, which is unsustainable. That can't go on forever. And is very expensive in the long term. So upskilling staff, hiring apprentices, and improving job quality, 3 of the 4 top reasons that responses. These are 3 of the 4 top responses arguably involve the L&D team. So these were the reasons why people said that they wanted to invest to keep hold of their staff, and ultimately they all involve an L&D element. If you go next slide, please, Cathryn. So looking at this in more detail, it's not just organisations who are focused on upskilling. Employees are too. and are realising that actually retraining and increasing their skills and knowledge is a critical component for career development. According again to our same survey and our report in November 21, a third of UK employees have recently completed upskilling training, and we can see that certain segments of the working population are more adversely affected than others. 1 in 4 senior managers, for example, have already retrained and changed industry, and a further 27% have retrained but not yet changed professions. Also, a third of young workers have retrained. So we're seeing this real strong trend of employees taking matters into their own hands and retraining for their own career development. So leading on to the next slide, I guess what opportunities therefore are being offered by L&D in this new world of retraining and reskilling? Well, starting with mandatory training. Mandatory training we found in this report is typically required annually, and 55% of the practitioners that we surveyed said that they had an annual requirement for mandatory training. Although there were some organisations where actually this was shortened even further to every 6 months. 18% of our practitioners said that they did, completed mandatory training for their organisation every 6 months. Just 13% said that their organisation didn't require any mandatory training whatsoever. What we didn't discover, I guess, was what goes in this bucket of mandatory training, but predominantly from some of the feedback we were seeing, this was very compliance-based, compliance-led training that went into this bucket. Moving on to the next slide, how does this contrast to non-mandatory training? Nearly a third of our practitioners said their organisation doesn't offer any voluntary, i.e. non-mandatory training opportunities for their staff. Now, I guess what's at play here? Could it be budget? Could it be workloads? We know both of those things are very, very tight at the moment. But I guess in the long term, this lack of opportunity around non-mandatory could be very short-sighted. And I guess it's offering just the learning opportunities that are absolutely critical, means there's lots of scope for things outside of that are missing. And that could be really, really useful in the long term when we look at the needs of organisations in the long term, evolving, changing, adapting. And we all know that we're going to need to upskill and reskill our colleagues as we take that long-term view of business growth. So interesting here that not as much focus is being put on the non-mandatory training. Cathryn, if you go next slide, please. So we saw in the presentation just how critical upskilling is to survive in the current economic climate. And really being competitive in that labour market. If I can't buy talent in, or the talent that I'm looking to buy in comes at too much of a premium, is too expensive, I really need to turn my attention to upskilling. That's going to become absolutely critical. However, our data suggests that UK organisations continue to focus on the traditional L&D areas, such as health and safety, for example. Reskilling, which many commentators and professional bodies say is critical to organisation, is offered to only 14% of employees, according to our survey. Digital skills, as an example of that, are offered to just over a quarter of organisations. So although we know that it's important, we're not seeing that wash through in what's being offered to employees. While only a fifth of organisations offer an onboarding programme, something that we know is absolutely critical to creating a really positive employee experience, especially for workers entering a hybrid or remote working environment, which I'm guessing we've all experienced in the past 2 years. We know that people who don't have a positive onboarding experience, whether you categorise that as first week or month or 90 days, are far more likely to leave their organisation. So I guess the question is, why waste the time, effort and money hiring good people only to lose them because of a lack of focus on L&D? And this is really where L&D and talent teams can really start to raise their profile internally and make a massive contribution back to their business. If we go to the next slide, please, Cathryn. If we now look at the responses from practitioners, we see more recognition of the importance of upskilling from the practitioners that we surveyed. 3/4 of respondents said they were offering upskilling opportunities. So I guess why isn't this matching with what employees are experiencing? It feels like when you look at this, there's a real disconnect between what practitioners feel that they're offering employees versus what employees are saying that are receiving from the other end. And I guess a multitude of reasons of why that could be. Could it be that just the ways of working over the last 2 years have fragmented teams, and there's less communication going on between teams within the organisation, and therefore people are just less aware of what opportunities are being offered and made available by their organisation? And maybe that's what we're seeing here in the results of this survey. A similar proportion said that they are offering onboarding and orientation programs, but again, that's not necessarily tallying up with the employee's experience. Now, again, this could be down to an awareness issue. The employees that were surveyed hadn't recently joined the organisation and therefore were completely unaware of what induction programs and what orientation existed. So again, I think a lot of this speaks to maybe a disconnect and that communication channel just not being open between practitioners and the employees that ultimately they serve within the organisation. Next slide, please, Cathryn. So what do employees think about the L&D opportunities? We've spoken lots about practitioners, but what do the employees themselves think? Well, I guess first some good news. So 56% of practitioners think their organisation offers good L&D opportunities, while 36% say that they're around average. Employees, on the other hand, are broadly happy with the L&D opportunities afforded to them, with just over a half saying that their employer prioritises training. So it's a big percentage there of employees that are happy saying that their employer prioritised training within their organisation. But when we look at the next slide and dive a little bit deeper, we do start to see some discrepancies emerge. So the majority of employees said that their most recent training activity or course was required by their employer, with slightly fewer saying that it was offered by their employer. Just 12.6% said that they had requested training themselves. So we're seeing here that a lot more of it's coming from the employer than actually maybe the employee self-generating that inquiry. But a survey of practitioners found that the largest segment, 35%, said that it would be most likely that an employee would instigate or request training within their organisation. However, if we add up all the other responses, which total 65%, these represent different segments of an organisation requesting or inviting an employee to complete training offered. So we're not necessarily seeing the two things line up in terms of what practitioners think is being driven by the employee and what the employees themselves are saying that they're driving around their own development agenda. I guess think about the training opportunities your organisation offers. Do you have a top-down, we know best approach? Or do you give employees the freedom and flexibility to choose what interests them? Which approach, I guess, is going to serve your organisation's long-term goals best? Do you want to direct employees to gain skills in areas that you know they'll need in the future? Or, do you trust their instincts? Do you want to see where their interests take them? Some companies give employees training budgets that they are free to spend in whichever activities they see fit. Whether that's activities to do with the business or whether that's about personal growth and development, like yoga training or art lessons, even if there's no direct link to the workplace activity, because organizations value on building a learning culture, where actually it's more around let's just celebrate learning any aspect rather than necessarily just focused always on the skills that are right for the organization. So are learning opportunities as useful as they could be? Well, a quarter of employees feel that training is a bit of a tick box exercise, compared to just 2% of practitioners. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. This is likely to be down to a lack of learning culture and poor communication from the people L&D with line managers and employees about the value of learning opportunities. Even though repetitive, you must do it annually type experiences. Practitioners are also more likely to regard training opportunities as being useful to employees' future careers, and that learning activities, and they feel that learning activities define skills and knowledge gaps. We can't tell from the data exactly why this is, but communication is again likely to be at the heart of this. If people are not brought into their future career path and can't understand why they're being asked or invited to do something, they're more likely to regard it as a negative experience. Practitioners are also way more likely to say training will change how someone works. Is there a biased view among people who make or commission training? Something somewhere is being lost in communication, where practitioners, the organisation, feel that what they're offering is adding real value to career development, versus colleagues seeing it as a bit of a tick box exercise. And maybe that piece in the middle is that communication that we need to strengthen around what training people are attending, and most importantly, why they need to attend it for their benefit. Moving on to the next slide, because despite all of this, the majority of employees, almost 3/4, say that they've been trained sufficiently for their role, which on the surface is good news. But if we pair it with the lack of focus on upskilling, we could infer that organisations are focused on training their people for the here and now, and not necessarily looking far enough ahead to prepare them for the future, which will have consequences both for the individual employee and the organisation themselves if those skill gaps aren't identified for the future and trained against. So moving on to the next slide, what are managers in particular missing out on in terms of employee training? So in a recent report by us, 1 in 4, 26% of managers said that they had never received any management training, and a further 2/5, 39%, only received management training when they first became a manager, nothing since then. Just a third, 35% of UK managers enjoyed regular training opportunities provided by their organisation. Interestingly, men reportedly received more regular training than women, 38% compared to 32%, and only 1/5, 21% of male managers compared to 2/3, 32% of female managers say they've received no training whatsoever. So there does seem to be a bias in who's receiving this training, and that bias does seem to be towards a male audience versus female colleagues. What could be playing into this, part-time employees are less likely, according to our report, to have received management training than their full-time counterparts. And we know when we look at the data that part-time employees, in a disproportionate amount of those, are female colleagues. So that could be feeding into this, why female colleagues are not receiving the same management training as their male counterparts. I guess ultimately, if managers aren't trained and are properly supported, are they likely to support a learning culture and feel valued learning opportunities for their own staff? So if they're not experiencing it for themselves, how do we expect them to then go and extend the virtues of personal development for their colleagues if they're not receiving it for themselves? We need them to really lead by example. So looking more broadly at the report, based on the findings, how do people want to learn? So we've looked at what people are learning in those type of activities, but how are people saying that they would like to engage with their learning content? So as much as the pandemic has seen a big growth in hybrid and remote working, and that inevitably has led to a pivot towards online learning activities and courses as a result, there's still a clear role from our findings in this report for face-to-face in-person learning. especially for workers who've continued to commute to a place of work throughout the pandemic. We can also see that there's a bit of a mismatch between what's being offered and what learners want from training. Employees are likely, given most online learning, would prefer to be offered in-person training. That's something for businesses to really think about and contemplate as we return to the office. Initially, the focus is all on the logistics of going back to the workplace, you know, health and safety, managing the space, etc. But then we're probably going to worry about communication and collaboration a lot more. And how do we still include that? You know, the work from homers in hybrid meetings, for example. How many organisations are actively thinking about reshaping their L&D offerings for hybrid workplace? Will they be keeping online? Will it be a mixture of online and in person? And how are we going to facilitate that? How's that going to work? There's some big questions there. And is there scope for a more nuanced approach and more critical appraisal of the types of skills and knowledge that are best suited for different learning formats? Practitioners also want to be offering more in-person training, but the demand is not as significant as among employees. We can infer, though, that practitioners would prefer to be less leaning heavily on online training sessions and self-directed learning, and be more leaning towards in-house learning activities delivered in person. Perhaps there's a desire for more on-the-job training, something that we've not necessarily assessed in this particular set of data, but definitely something that's worth exploring as we return to the office. So with all of this in mind, let's have a look at how organisations are planning on balancing these budgets and employee workloads. So around a quarter of practitioners said their organisation doesn't offer L&D opportunities to all staff. This is likely due to budget and time constraints, but with learning at the heart of long-term success, these decisions may feel like a short-term gain with some long-term pain involved. A quarter of our practitioners said that they don't have a specific L&D budget for employees at all. And I guess, you know, there's a few different routes to this. Some organisations budget per head. Some organisations have an overall budget and then split that according to the needs and the skills of the organisation. But interesting that a quarter said that they don't actually budget for any L&D activity whatsoever. And training time often isn't prioritised. Only 2/3 of workers say they're given adequate time at work to complete training activities. The proportion of people who are expected to undertake training in their free time was slightly higher for those in part-time roles compared to their full-time employees. So I guess the question here is around how much work are we putting in to create those learning cultures within the organisation so people feel empowered to take time out to learn new skills within their working day. And to that end, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Andrea. He's going to talk to you more around how employers could respond to some of these results in the survey.
Great. Thanks, Bradley. That was really lots of stats there and lots of food for thought in there. So to give us a bit of an idea of what the feeling is on both sides, and I think it gives a really balanced view between sort of practitioners and employees. So yeah, exactly. So with all that in mind, I mean, how can you respond to this to build out that sort of L&D and respond to some of those trends that are happening across the organization? So obviously we heard earlier about filling vacancies becoming much more difficult in the current climate, and you know, this has always been a challenge, but I think it's been emphasized by the last couple of years by a number of factors. And this is where we feel that, you know, a well-rounded learning strategy can really help organizations weather this storm. So there's the whole sort of adage of the attract, retain, develop methodology. So you've all heard the saying of hire for attitude, trade for skill. Well, this can obviously open up a whole new talent pool and contribute to your employer brand as an organization committed to developing their staff. Now, there's obviously a lot of reluctance to do that because, you know, there's a fear that people can't hit the ground running. It's going to take longer to train up. But developing from the ground up can have a lot of benefits. And you can be looking into things like developing entry-level programs, look at apprenticeships, or even perhaps reskilling programs to help upskill those inexperienced employees, whether they be new to the world of work or even perhaps transitioning from another industry, sector, or a job role. and this will sort of help them to sort of effectively apply those transferable skills to a new role. So you never know, you might sort of find your rising star amongst those candidates that you might have historically dismissed from the recruitment process. Also, have a think about how you're promoting your learning right from that pre-boarding stage. Get employees ready to start work from day one by giving them access to that required learning even before they start. Building this into the induction process with clear, sort of meaningful pathways gives new starters a positive first impression, and helps them get up to speed with their job and feel confident in their role faster. So if they can be knocking off some of that mandatory training before they start with you, even if it's just a few e-learning modules, it means from day one they can be having those conversations with their colleagues and their manager about what they need to be doing in their day-to-day role. Of course, once they're in place and they're all confirmed in the role, succession planning then leads to that staff retention piece. So make sure you're providing more opportunities for that upskilling and career development to help retain staff and reduce that risk of turnover. So in this way, you can be leveraging those competency frameworks to assess where there might be skills gaps. Bradley referred to sort of on-the-job training before. Look at how you can embed that in the everyday and sort of provide feedback on what people are doing and how they're applying that learning to their everyday roles. Mentoring schemes as well can help prepare those employees for the next step up, get them to be sharing that expertise across the organisation. And of course, as we saw, management training. So, don't forget those managers. As we saw, with the training slide earlier, this can often be lacking, which can sometimes mean that employees move into management roles without the skills and tools that they need to effectively lead their teams. So by providing that training and support to develop the leaders in your business will have a positive impact on employees, and will also ensure that there's buy-in from the top into the value of L&D. So it's not just about managers having those skills and being able to lead effective teams, but also helping them to understand the value of learning and development, how that can impact both their own role to be able to support their teams, but also how their teams then perform in their roles and succeed moving forward. So, essentially embedding learning into all these phases of the employee life cycle will really help to develop a strong culture of learning, which then will contribute to a greater employee satisfaction and help prepare employees for the next step in their career, hopefully within your organisation. However, if employees leave and if they've reached the limit of how far they can progress, they might well leave, but they will often leave an organisation with a positive view if they feel like they've been given every opportunity to succeed and be supported in their growth so far. From this, you then develop that employee advocacy where they're more likely to recommend your organisation to their wider network when someone's looking for the next career step, or even potentially return to your organisation at a later date when a new opportunity emerges. And we've seen this happen time and time again, even with our own organisation here. So if we can just move on to the next slide. So in terms of, that all obviously sounds all good and well, but, if you're starting from scratch, how do you get employees and managers to engage with the learning? Creating that culture of learning can be quite difficult, and we obviously could devote a whole webinar just to this topic and have a lot of debate about how we put that in place. But, there's a few areas that you might want to consider in terms of building that culture across your organisation. So look at embedding learning in the everyday. It's not just about doing your annual compliance training, but it's taking the opportunity to learn at every turn. Perhaps it's an on-the-job observation with some constructive feedback. It could be a productive discussion with a peer about a particular challenge you're trying to overcome, or it could even just be reading an article that's relevant to your industry or role that gives you some top tips on a particular topic. Also really important to make any learning that you push out there meaningful and relevant. So for example, mandatory training. Does everyone need to do it? Can you refresh it so that learners aren't completing the same activities year after year? Could you use assessments to determine the level of knowledge to decide who needs to complete, who doesn't? Employees aren't then just going through the motions of completing unnecessary training and can focus their efforts on what they need to complete, as well as other areas that is going to benefit their development. Equally, look at providing access to curated learning pathways with meaningful outcomes, which can then be recommended to employees based on their career aspirations, their technical skills development, or other areas that are highlighted as part of perhaps your performance review process where employees want to develop their skills and their career goals. We all love something shiny, so creating that sort of sense of reward and achievement is always quite important. Provide those really clear learning goals and recognize employee achievements when they reach those goals. You could also look at calibrating your learning results with business metrics to test and measure the efficacy of that learning and ensure that it's supporting employees in the right way to deliver on the business objectives that you need to achieve. And finally, evolving your L&D offer is going to be really, really key in this overall sort of scheme of where we're at. We've all seen and faced the challenges over the last 2 years, which have fundamentally disrupted and changed the way we work. So Bradley was talking before about, we've moved into more hybrid ways of delivering learning, but, there is still that need for that human touch and being able to kind of, continue to blend that learning and have different modes of delivery to make it most effective. So obviously this has meant we've had to reconsider not only how to deliver learning, but what kind of learning is needed. Thinking about things like, has there been a need to provide more training in digital skills or mental health and well-being? Have you had to adapt face-to-face training to virtual or remote channels, and now back to the other way? So the world of work will constantly evolve. This is not the first, this hasn't been the first, it won't be the last change that we've experienced in our careers. So you should continue to evolve your training offering as well to make sure it adapts to those needs. And if we just move on to the next slide. So in terms of having your sort of strategies and plans in place, that's one thing, but investing in the right tools for the job, like our Digits LMS platform, is vital to help organizations effectively manage their L&D efforts, and it also help you to move from more of a push to a pull approach. So it's not just about that top-down approach of this is the training you need to complete. It's really encouraging learners to take ownership of the learning, to seek out development opportunities and show where they're committed to kind of progressing their career and developing within their roles. So these kinds of tools will help you, engage all your employees. So it helps you to look at, how to deliver a more blended approach, giving you access to, a variety of different training types. So not just e-learning or PDFs, it allows you to blend in that in-person element, which could be around a workshop, it could be mentoring and coaching conversations, or simply a peer-to-peer exchange of knowledge and on-the-job training to embed that knowledge within the practical. Making it really visual as well, so not just about presenting a list of training, but creating really quite dynamic learning pathways. So a learning management system will help you to do that, to pull together a range of different content into those pathways, make it quite visually appealing and clear of how the learner needs to progress through that program of learning and what they're setting out to achieve. And of course, it goes without saying, ease of access, that anywhere, anytime access is really key. Having a mobile optimized system where learners can learn on the go. We're all attached to our smartphones these days. So, having the ability just to log on, do a bit of quick of e-learning on a commute or on lunch break is really key to keep that engagement and learning going. Also, being able to push out reminders on what training is needed to be completed, or if it hasn't yet been completed or it needs to be refreshed, is really key as well. An LMS can also help empower your learners with their learning. So it can enable them to discover courses within a learning library, for example. So if they want to go and explore other materials that might be useful outside of anything that's been assigned as mandatory, they've got those options. And also assess where they might need the most support through using something like a skills analysis tool that could then recommend training on the basis of them, having a skills gap in a certain area. Also, giving them the autonomy to book onto workshops and classroom-based training is really key. Saves a lot of admin on your time of not having to sort of follow up and send out automated reminders, but also gives those learners that autonomy to kind of decide with what's going to fit in with their schedule and when that's going to work best. So they're more likely to then take up that training that's required of them. And then also that piece around sharing expertise with their peers. That social learning aspect is so key. So it's not just about here's all the activities and modules you need to do, but here's all the peers in your organization who have expertise that you can draw on to help you understand more about your role, your sector, the business itself. Obviously, tracking progress is key, and this can be one of the most time-consuming aspects that we've seen across a lot of organizations. So I'm still amazed at how many organizations still work with just spreadsheets and trying to track the stuff manually. So, the right tools will help you to do that in a much more automated way. So you can have assessment tools that can help you measure the retention of that knowledge and check that people have actually understood the learning. You can look at, the impact of learning and engagement in the system with metrics and insights. Reporting, we all know reports are key. So, being able to report on that activity to ensure, compliance has been met, that learners are on track, and that everything has been completed as it should be. And then also giving learners the ability to easily track their progress through sort of visual dashboards, really simple systems that they can quickly log in, see how they're progressing, what they're yet to complete, as well as allowing their managers to have that same view so they can provide the right support for their teams to make sure they've finished all their learning that they need to. And we mentioned before about the rewarding learning. So, you know, having tools in there that can kind of gamify that learning, kind of celebrate the achievements, give those learners a sense of direction. And that could be rewarded with like badges. You can have leaderboards to create a bit of competition and fun in it, or even just certificates and reward points just to kind of recognize those achievements and keep that motivation high as learners work through all their different pathways. So having these tools in place will also free up valuable time from those more administrative tasks. So it will help you automate things like assignments, reporting, tracking of learning, which will enable you then to spend much more time on your strategic goals, particularly around that talent management, succession planning, and learner engagement. So if you do want to learn more about how Digits LMS can support your L&D strategy in these ways, please do get in touch with us, and we'd be more than happy to set up a call following this webinar. So thanks very much, and I'll hand over back to Cathryn.
Thanks so much, Andrea and Bradley, for taking us through all of that data and some ideas of things to think about that you could take away and put into place at your organisations. We have some time now for a Q&A, so if anyone has any questions, please send them in, but I'll kick us off. Bradley, obviously you took us through like loads of data. Were there any particular bits that really gave you pause for thought and thought, oh yeah, I might need to have a think about that?
I think from my perspective, Cathryn, the bit that really made me pause was just seeing the kind of disconnect that's opened up between practitioners and the people that they serve. And I guess when I looked at this, I thought, actually, is there a point here where even within our own organisation, we kind of need to grab hold of this report and just go and talk to colleagues? Do we need to do more listening to really understand why is that disconnect there? Why are they not seeing the things that we're doing and able to tap into it? And ultimately, how could we make that easier for them? Because clearly there's a lot of great work being done by practitioners in the UK, but it's just not filtering across to employees. And I don't know if there's just a bit of re-engagement there, a bit of communication that needs to reopen just to find out what's going on there. And I've kind of used this survey as a bit of a catalyst for that conversation, to say, look, you know, seen this report, some interesting stuff here. I wouldn't mind to come out and have a talk with you around some of the findings in this survey.
And I do some work in the HR space as well, and there's quite often a lot of chatter about surveying, doing pulse surveys of employees to find out how they're feeling, how their well-being's doing, like what their workload's like, stress levels, etc. But I don't get much of a sense that L&D is part of that pulse surveying conversation, that we're checking in and seeing on how people are feeling about learning. Does that tally with your experience, Bradley, Andrea, either of you?
I mean, I think, you know, it really depends on the organisation, and I think often learning does sort of take a bit of a backseat because it's sometimes viewed as just a kind of a nice to have. But I think there is an increasing awareness of the importance of it, and whether that's been the pandemic or whether that's just been other factors within the industry that have just sort of suggested that, you know, and I think it's coming from employee demand as well. I think more and more employees are seeking out those L&D opportunities because they want to progress, and they want to progress a lot faster in their careers. So they're seeing, you know, they need to have the right learning in place to do that. So I think traditionally maybe it's been a bit of an afterthought, but I think it's increasingly coming to the forefront.
And I guess just to build on what you said there, Andrea, it has to as well. You know, we know that as we look forward in terms of the future of work, you know, people are going to have to change careers far more often just to keep up with the pace of change that's going on in the wider world. You know, if you look at the days of kind of, you know, graduating or finishing school, getting a job, and then seeing that job through to retirement, they're gone. They don't exist anymore. You know, we know that, you know, people entering the workforce today are likely going to need to do a full career change at least 5 times within their working life. So the whole piece around L&D really taking ownership of that and having a bigger voice within the organisation, it's not really a nice to have, it's an absolutely critical component. Because what are we going to do with all of these people if we're not going to reskill them and re-educate them on the jobs of the future? We can't just wait for it to happen and hope it's all going to fix itself. We've got to play an active part in that.
Yeah, we can't just hope that someone else is going to take care of it, and there'd be some kind of another organisation might offer the reskilling, or the government might introduce some kind of training plan. It's kind of up to us to sort that out. And if we we look at that in the context of like Linda Grattan's book from a few years ago, the 100-year life. Like, this is not just changing careers 5 times before you're 40. It's working until you're 70 or you're 80 and having to reskill and keep that learning mindset for years and years and years. So we talked a lot about how, you know, the problem really seems to be a cultural one, not that L&D practitioners aren't doing a great job. But how much of this, like, to improve circumstances, is it dependent on technology? Does culture come before introducing technology, or can it be the other way around, that technology can drive cultural change?
I would say it's kind of a bit of both. It kind of goes hand in hand, and I think it's not, you know, I think sometimes people we speak to, they want to put a learning management system or some other sort of tech solution in. I think it'll be a bit of a magic wand, but I think there does have to be that consideration of the culture, but also that engagement piece. So not just kind of throwing everything at everyone all at once. It's about phasing in that learning. So, you know, when you put an LMS system in place for the first time, is it about just putting out a few courses and just getting people used to it before you start opening up other features? You know, it goes the same with that HR technology as well. You know, it's not overwhelming people who are not used to, you know, systems in place. But I think, yeah, what wraps around it is all those things I was talking about earlier, of just making sure that, you know, you've got buy-in, that people actually understand the value of learning, and unfortunately that value is sometimes not demonstrated till you have the right tools in place as well. So it is a bit of a chicken and egg kind of scenario, but I think, yeah, there are definitely considerations that need to go hand in hand, and ultimately having an understanding of what do you need to achieve as a business. So what's your ultimate goals as a business? What is the kind of human resource that you need in your business to achieve that, and what kind of skills and support do those people need to then support the achievement of those goals? And from that will come your learning strategy and the tools that you need to then kind of build that through the organization. I don't know, Bradley, if you've got any further thoughts on that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything you've just said there, Andrea. And I think what the technology does is the technology gives learning and development a home. It gives it a place that people can go to. You know, we've spoken about this at length internally within our own organisation around how do you create that one-stop shop for all knowledge. So if a colleague needs to know anything or wants to further their development or enhance their learning, they know where to go. And I think that's what the technology does. It doesn't deliver the cultural change for you. That requires a complete, you know, strategy from the HR and people team to deliver that. But what the technology does is it gives that strategy a home. It gives it a place. It anchors it within the organization. And then you can use that to start to give you those powerful insights around what content people like, what are they consuming, how are they consuming it. So you can then be far more targeted in the type of activities that you produce moving forward. But yeah, it's a tool which is part of the solution, but it's not just going to solve it itself just by putting it in place.
And how important is it to be linking up your LMS, for example, with your HR system so that you can really start to show the impact of training on the bottom line?
My view is it's critical, Cathryn, you know, and I can say this because I've worked in this world for many years. I myself have made the mistake many times of delivering lots of, you know, really great engaging training, but not necessarily then following up on, well, what difference did that really make? And I think linking it back into the core HR systems gives you an opportunity to really measure that difference. I think we are seeing now a blurring of the edges between, you know, learning and development, performance management, talent management, succession. It's all kind of merging into this one melting pot. Because what I do over here, I need to be able to track what difference it's making over here. So these LMS platforms, you know, like Andrea's just spoken about R1, you are seeing them evolve to be more than just a place where I go to do my learning. It's a place where I go to, you know, build my career. And look at my performance and look at what learning's available to improve my performance. So there's a real blurring of the edges there. I don't know if you agree with that, Andrea.
Oh, 100%. And I think it is very much about bringing that whole employee life cycle together. So it's not, yeah, it's about giving that sort of data for learners to make the right decisions, but also as a business, being able to track that against other metrics, you know, that you might want to look at. So you might want to look at staff turnover, you might want to look at your gender pay gap reports, you might want to look at absences, you know, all that good stuff in line with you know, if someone is being properly trained up and supported, are they engaged in their job? Are they staying longer? You know, are they getting the right sort of pay progressions that should be expected in line with their skills and development? So yeah, I think it creates a very powerful set of information that you need from, you know, not just HR, but from talent, from, you know, and learning development and so on, to inform what you need to be doing in line with those sort of overall business objectives.